Hello, and welcome to the Beautiful Truths third episode in our live stream series. But this is our first live podcast, so it's a bit of an experiment. It will definitely be human and true, and hopefully it will be beautiful. So hopefully it will combine all the wonderful things that the Beautiful Truth exhibit. My name's Sarah Gillard. I'm the CEO of a charity called A Blueprint for Better Business. Our charity exists to create better society through better business. So as you can imagine, we have been good friends with the Beautiful Truth for a number of years, and I'm delighted to be joined by Claudia and Adam today to talk hard truths and hopeful stories. And for any of you who thought that that was the story of the England football team, given that we're about to kick off in an hour's time, I don't think we're going to talk about football. I might be wrong.
You never know.
Might go there.
You never know.
You never know. It comes up in all sorts of places. But we're here to talk about hard truths and hopeful stories, particularly in the business context. And I think one of the reasons that I have been invited to join this conversation is because the work that we do as a charity and have been doing for the last 15 years is working with senior leaders in large businesses, helping them to unlock potential for their business and for society at large through the understanding of purpose and meaning. What are we actually trying to do in the world, and how does that impact on people in society at large? And I think it's fair to say that although we've been going for 15 years, the last couple have been interesting, to say the least. I think a number of things have been dialed up in the world, and that has very much impacted on business and its leaders. I think we're seeing high levels of disruption and uncertainty, 'twas ever thus, I guess, but across many dimensions now: geopolitics, politics, technology, environment, society, economics. Pretty much every dimension, there is a high degree of disruption and uncertainty, and that is creating concerns around the future, I think, on a number of levels. Individually, people feel concerned about what does this mean for me and my family. I think from an organizational level, particularly leaders are thinking, how does this affect our organization? Does this disrupt our business model? What do we do about that? How do we navigate through this period? From a society or community perspective, I think people are anxious about how these changes are going to impact them. And of course, globally, from a geopolitical perspective, we're living through extremely disrupted times. So all of that is creating a sense of unmooredness, I think. And there is a strong desire that I'm seeing in many of the people that I talk to for meaning, for somewhere solid to stand, for a reconnection to what makes us really human, particularly in an AI-enabled world. Where do we find joy? These sort of human characteristics that help us look towards a future that is not yet determined. I think it can be very easy to assume that the future is determined and we're just all sort of trudging there. But actually, it's not determined, and it'll be shaped by our choices. And at the moment, it often feels that those choices are about trying to make dystopia slightly less bad, rather than leaping towards a hopeful future. And of course, that is really colouring how we all feel about things. And one of the words that I've heard time and again recently in business is this need for storytelling. So it seems to have become an important part of how businesses are thinking about navigating this time. But I wondered, Adam and Claudia, from the work that you're doing, does my sort of context setting resonate? Does that sound like what you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that we're seeing again and again. We get involved in all sorts of work with different clients. I mean, we obviously have the magazine, which is this vision of what we think a business can and should be at this point in our history. But then we get called in to go and speak to clients and work with clients on the story that's needed today, either to address a lot of times the strategy of how we're going to get through this difficult year, 2 years, 3 years, this transformation of who we are, this loss of trust. We say that we work a lot on briefs around trust, meaning, and imagination. Why should I trust the businesses that I'm part of? Why are they beneficial in some way? And we're going to talk a bit about that. What's the meaning? Why am I even here? And then the imagination. How do we imagine a future that is better than today with the businesses that we're part of? So those are the kind of things that we end up working on.
Great, just small topics then. And Claudia,
Small stuff,
what are you seeing out there? Because I know this has been a particular, I don't know, coming together of a whole lot of passions of yours.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what we're seeing really the product of, and I think this was a survey recently, this sense of corporate numbness that people are feeling. And I think there's a lot of fear about trying to move jobs into something else. And so there's a lot of paralysis that we're seeing and people kind of going into this scarcity mindset. And from that place, it's incredibly difficult to act. I mean, on a sort of psychological, biological level, the future becomes more uncertain, more narrow, more scary, and so everything becomes this sort of downward spiral. And I think we're sort of seeing that in how clients are communicating in terms of the news they need to be delivering, the layoffs, the restructuring, and it's become, even as I'm talking about it, I can feel my chest tightening. Right, there's a sense of fear that I think we're swimming in.
It feels like one of the only, I'm now 51, and obviously we've lived through this time of unprecedented growth, and there was always a feeling that, well, in some way or other, tomorrow will be better than today. And I don't think people feel that anymore. I don't think people do kind of go, okay, well, actually, and that's having such a huge impact everywhere around the world that actually maybe tomorrow is not going to be better than today in terms of standards of living, in terms of what we stand for, in terms of, financial growth, in terms of all of these things.
Yeah. And I mean, I think a lot of people will recognize that framing. And so, the obvious answer is, oh, well, be an optimist, think positively, or any of these sort of other glib statements. But there is a real difference, isn't there, between hope and optimism? Often those words are used interchangeably, but they are not the same. Claudia, how do you understand the difference between hope and optimism?
Really, really different. And I think optimism actually has a kind of toxicity to it in this sort of hyper positive culture. But actually, when you look at what optimism means, it's this really unfounded belief that the future will be better than it is today. And it's a passive belief. Whereas hope is a practice. It's an active, goal-oriented, motivational state towards navigating towards a specific goal. Right? It's a way of actively engaging with the world around you. So they're very, very different things. And I think it's ironically, I think hope is seen as this quite fluffy thing. It's like, oh well, what talking about hope in the context of business, I think can almost feel fluffy. Whereas actually, it is at its core it's a galvanizing force towards a better future in a way that optimism isn't. And a deeper problem with optimism is that it's vulnerable to despair because it is sort of built around this idea of having predictions about the future. When those predictions don't come true, the human mind quickly turns very, very negative. And you can see that in the work of Viktor Frankl when he talked about being in the concentration camps in World War II. The people that he saw break first were the optimists. And it was the people that had built hope and they had a goal of something they wanted to complete or finish in the world once they got out, and they created meaning around what was happening. Those were the people that really were able to survive. And I think that's a really extraordinary difference between the two.
Yeah, that really resonates, actually. I mean, so much of the work that we've done with businesses, really is about trying to understand energy inside businesses. And what we found is the sense of collective endeavor. What are we actually trying to achieve together, and how is it that's meaningful, that creates this energy and the innovation and the sense of momentum and that businesses thrive on? So given that, Adam, why is hope so hard to find right now? I mean, we've talked about some of the external systemic conditions, I guess, that are
Yeah.
meaning that it's hard to find. But is there anything else going on that means
Yeah.
it's a challenging
I think
place?
it sort of connects to what it is you were saying, and also Claudia, what you were saying in terms of Frankel. It's meaning. It's very hard for us to know what any of this is really for anymore. And if we don't find any meaning, if we don't know why we're going through it, or that we're going to come out the other side, or that if we just endure this bit, we are going to, I don't know, increase our sense of courage and increase our sense of connection to the people around us. If we don't know what it's all for, then it's very difficult to go through it. And I think that I've become mildly obsessed with a guy called John Vervaeke, who has this 40-hour lecture series that he calls Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, where he goes all the way from the Greek philosophers all the way through to now, and how we've ended up in a place where we are lacking meaning in our society and in our world. We don't know what we're supposed to follow. We don't know what we're supposed to do it for. It feels like our governments are obviously ever changing. We don't know that they necessarily have our best interests at heart. We don't necessarily think our businesses have our best interests at heart. So then what is it that we're doing all this for? So I think why it's so difficult is this meaning piece has been eroded enough that we then find it difficult to have a vision of something else.
Yeah. I mean, you can really see that in the stats, can't you? In the latest Gallup survey around global engagement at work, it's low, 20%, and falling. So 4 out of 5 people at work are not engaged. And actually, when they looked at how that sort of manifests in leaders are in a very bad place in terms of more stress, more anger, more sadness, more loneliness. So the very people who perhaps, at work people look to help them find meaning are feeling least equipped to do it right now. Claudia, from a sort of human perspective, why is this important? What role does meaning play in our lives, and how do we get there?
Yeah, so I think, I would just sort of also just briefly adding to the previous question, our brain has a negativity bias. So it's not just that the world right now feels very fearful and there's so many things happening. Our brains, literally 2/3 of the neurons in our amygdala, in the limbic system, are coded towards looking for threat. And so if we want to create a more hopeful framing, it has to be intentional. You have to go against the sort of natural state of the brain. And I think that's really important to remember. It's not just what's happening around us in the world, it's the way that we are built as a survival mechanism. And linked to that, hope isn't just an emotion. It fundamentally has the ability to broaden your perspective and your view of possible options in front of you, and builds your capacity to be able to actually reach them. And so the most prominent psychologist who does hope work is a guy called Charles Snyder, and he actually describes hope not as an emotion, but as a cognitive structure. And it has to have 3 elements to it. There's a goal that you're working towards. There's pathways towards that goal and the ability to find new routes when one closes, and the belief that you can actually walk them, the agency piece. And it's those 3 elements that are incredibly critical. And I think because of that, hope can work amidst uncertainty, right? You don't have to be certain about the outcome to be able to hold hope. And that is why we can hold hope in the darkness. And that's why it's so important.
Yeah. And it's that agency word's come up a number of times, and I think it is so critical, isn't it? Because these forces feel huge. And if there's a sort of passive response to that, whether it's despair or just sort of nameless optimism, you begin to lose your sense of your role in the story.
Yeah.
So
I think just to add to that, because this is kind of where hopefully we get a little bit more positive as well, because
we're not halfway through
the
yet,
problem for quite some time now. So
no.
I think it's the that sense of everybody has a theory of what storytelling is. Interestingly, hearing Claudia talk about Snyder, Will Storr, who is also has been a collaborator. We've done a few things with him. Who's written extensively on storytelling, says a story is overcoming an obstacle in pursuit of a goal. That's what a story is, and of course, again, we see this all the time. If you can tell the story of that, if you can, sports personalities, seeing themselves on that finish line with that goal, they're telling themselves that story of where they can be and what they can do. They're putting themselves in there. They're overcoming that obstacle in pursuit of a goal. And Rob Hopkins, also another envisager of the future, talks about this importance of being able to envisage a future that is positive, because if we don't do it, we're not going to get there. If we're constantly thinking it's going to be bad, it's going to be bad, it's going to be bad, that's the only thing that we see. But the mind is an incredible thing, and is elastic and can create all sorts of wonderful and terrible things. And if we can focus on that wonder, if we can focus on that possibility, if we can focus on those stories, then we start to move towards that better outcome.
I mean, that's why I think it's really important of who is telling the stories, right? Because I think there is that fear of sort of spin or washing with a story, and actually it's who are the leaders telling the stories, and do we trust them? And those critical elements of trust in the literature. Do I believe that you're competent? Do I believe you have the capability to follow through on that goal and those pathways? Do I trust that you really care? Do I trust that you are invested in my well-being and in my success? And that third piece of, do I trust your character? Do I trust that when nobody is looking at you, that you still have integrity and you have honesty? And I think often in business, we over-index on that competence piece, right? We over-index on demonstrating that, yes, I am capable. But actually, if you really want to build trust, and you will only trust hopeful stories from those people that really have those three elements, that you care, you are competent, and you have integrity.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely sort of recognize the over-indexing on competence in business. I think the other thing that businesses tend to over-index in is data. And for many people, this word storytelling almost creates a bit of an allergic reaction, because it sounds like spin, or it sounds manipulative, or it sounds like we're trying to put a sort of sheen on some difficult truths. And surely data is sufficient. We just give people the data and then they can draw their own conclusions. And why do we need to tell stories? And perhaps, some of our politicians have recently discovered that sort of data-led approach doesn't always reach people. So how do you overcome, in your work that you do with business, how do you overcome that challenge of, isn't the data enough? Why do we need stories?
Yeah, I would say, that's something that we've come up against again and again, is people want data, they want evidence. But business feels like it's a machine that if you just give it enough proof points that something is working, it works. And maybe that's also one of the reasons why it's become so difficult for employees and stakeholders of different types in business at the moment. One of the things I think is interesting is, even with data, you're looking for meaning. You're not looking for you're just not looking at the data itself. You're looking at what the data means. If somebody's giving you bad news, we ran a piece of recently in the magazine, which has done very well, because people seem fascinated on how is it that you can deliver bad news. People aren't just looking at the bad news, they're looking at what the bad news means. And very often, and this comes into then our definition of storytelling, stories are about identity. Who is the hero really? And change. Who is that hero going to be at a time of immense change or challenge? And you can go back, you can take that formula, you can go back thousands of years, and you see the same thing again and again. And the reason it works is not because it's a good story, it's because we're asking that of ourselves. Who am I really? And who am I going to be at a time of immense change or challenge? And so when we hear bad news, or we're going through this disruption, we're asking ourselves that question of who I am. When somebody is giving you some bad news, it's like, okay, who am I at this moment? Who am I as my world changes, shifts? What's going to be the risk? How will I stand up? How will I take that forward? So people are always looking for that meaning. I think data, the idea that it's just data is false.
Well, it's interesting, the data idea. I mean, you mentioned about organizations being like machines. I think we are operating with that view of an organization is like a machine, and the employees are its cogs, and you can transfer information from one to the other through data. And it's just a fundamentally broken way of understanding what an organization is, which is a collective group of people. So without deeply understanding the psychology of people, and the way we understand and create meaning and purpose, and the way we move through the world is a fundamentally different way than a computer does, then you're sort of starting from the wrong premise.
Yep.
Yeah. And what a fascinating time to be talking about this. And maybe this is why storytelling is coming up so much, because in the sort of AI era, what does it mean to be human, and what are the ways in which we find meaning, and not just who am I, but who are we? Who is this collection of people who are trying to create some kind of value in the world, and whatever it is that our business does. So I think, and of course, many of those organizations that began to automate very heavily are now discovering that humans add all sorts of intangible things to a business that were not visible on a spreadsheet perhaps, but turn out to be pretty critical in how organizations operate, where the energy source is. So I mean, you've found this time and time again in the work that you do. How do you mine for these hopeful stories? Because you always say, which I think is lovely, you don't make them up; you uncover them like an archaeologist. So very much Indiana Jones. I imagine.
I have my bullwhip. I definitely take that out sometimes.
Yeah, how do you mine for these hopeful stories? Where do you go? Do you just sort of sit in the boardroom and listen? Do you go to the front line? Where do you go?
We're very much looking for authenticity. You'd hope for a company called The Beautiful Truth that there is some level of desire for authenticity in there. So we're listening to where the stakeholders are, where the directors or the C-suite, the executives are, and we're listening to where. I'd say 60% of our work is internal. So we're listening to where the employees are across the board, and we're working out where that disconnect is. Very often we use Scott Barry Kaufman's reimagining of Maslow's hierarchy, which he reimagined as a boat. And you have safety, connection, I can't remember what the third one is, in the bottom of the boat. And then you have exploration, love and purpose at the top. Now, the C-suite's job is to be in the top of the sail, is to be around purpose and exploration. But at times like this, the employees feel like they're at the bottom of the boat. They're feeling disconnected. They're feeling unsafe. They're feeling, as you said, unmoored. So any conversation immediately is going like this. How is it that we can't communicate? So a lot of our work is about trying to connect those two bits, particularly in difficult times. Now, of course, at the moment, a lot of companies can't say, "Oh, but it's okay because the future is going to be like this, and we've seen it, and this is our strategy and our plan, and it's all going to be okay." Very few, if any, of our clients can say that at the moment. But what they can say is, "This is who we are. This is the character." Come back to what I was saying about story. Any story is about identity and change. The change bit we can't predict, but we can always predict what our character is. We can always kind of emphasize those things that shape who we are. We did a piece recently with Anglo-American who are just about to undergo a really significant merger after being Anglo-American for sort of 100 years. And we called the campaign "The Power Within," and it was about the character and the courage and in an authentic way of the people within the company. It was who are we going to be as we go through this change as we go through this time, and the engagement scores were incredibly high for it. Because when we talk about who we can be, that's the question that we're all asking ourselves as human beings. What's the potential for our character, our courage, our ability to overcome obstacles, our ability to love, our ability for connections? That's what every story is about. So how do we find those and bring those to the fore, even if we can't predict the future?
Adam, I think that's a really good example because it's a perfect example of leadership still being in the sale, in the growth, but telling those stories actually of connection and belonging in the bottom of the boat because people were fearful of what was going to happen and what this meant for them. And I think it's more when you don't do that, and that is the biggest mistake we see, is leadership not speaking across those needs. It's not just a mismatch. When you're hearing growth stories, when you're feeling unsafe, it actually makes you feel more unsafe. It kind of, your psychological safety becomes even more narrow. So it has a really detrimental effect beyond just a mismatch. And that's one of the things we work around a lot, is just trying to understand where are your people so you can meet them where they are.
And very, very often we talk, and Sarah, thinking about you and your work on purpose, very often we say business is not just a profit-making entity, it is a meaning-making entity. People work at places when they could work anywhere, do anything, potentially, because it brings some meaning to their lives, be it because they're connected to the people around them, they believe in the cause. So how do we accent that meaning at times of disruption to help people through?
Absolutely. And I was deeply steeped in this when I was a John Lewis partner, because I probably
Yeah.
geeked out on the founder. And he famously said about 100 years ago that work should be something that people live for as well as something they live by.
Absolutely.
And I remember at the time
Absolutely.
getting goosebumps and thinking, well, I wonder what a world would look like if that was the case.
So founder stories are really interesting because
Yeah.
they give that sense of, okay, well, this is an authentic character of the business. And this is why leaders are important and why it's difficult at the moment, because leaders don't want to put their head above the parapet. But when you find those leaders who have that character that bring, as Claudia was saying, that benevolence and that trust, it becomes something else. The other thing I would say, in terms of difficult times, I don't know if anybody's listened to the Rutger Bregman Wreath lectures, and it's definitely worth reading Moral Ambition, although I have to admit I'm only halfway through it. There you go, authenticity. But I've read Humankind a couple of times. What Bregman is very good at doing, and again, to help people get through some of these difficult times, he's very good at going back and going, where have we been through something like this before? What was that character and what were those people and how did they address these problems? So we look, again, identity, we look for those heroes, we look for those places where we have been through difficult times before, and they can become our anchoring stories of how we address the present day problems and crises.
Yeah, I love that. I think it also gives a sense of groundedness, doesn't it? When you're able to look back through history and then project forward, I think it connects you to the sort of, I'm getting very poetic now, but a long line of humans. We've been in difficult times before and found a way of navigating. Beautiful. But I'm going to sum up in a minute. But anything else that you want to add to this hard truths and hopeful stories mini half hour that we've touched on just some of the brilliant stuff that you do? But
I think it's a practice. I think it's a practice, and we were talking. It's something that it's a muscle that needs exercising. It's not something that you can just kind of go, "Oh yeah, I'm hopeful." It's like, no, it's a practice. We've really got to look for those things, find that ammunition again and again. Amy, one of our team, was saying over lunch, people think it takes a lot of effort to be hopeful, but it takes a lot of effort to be morose and sad as well. How do we find that character and that view again and again? It needs work. What do you think, Claudia?
I couldn't agree more. You've got to go. You've got to go against the grain, and that's a beautiful thing. We need people right now that are going against the grain.
Amazing. Well, this has been just a joy to spend time with you both. I think, as we said, the role of storytelling right now is more important than ever, and particularly stories that help us discover who we are and who we are going to be at this time of change, grounded in empathy, in character, in care, in connection with each other, and of course in sort of competence. I mean, businesses feed on competence, but all of these other elements are so important. And I think the work that you do in helping businesses tell their story of who they are and why they create value in all sorts of different ways of defining value in a world of uncertainty is critical. And connecting people to that meaning is good work right now. So thank you for everything that you do. I think this has been a really interesting insight into your world, and I hope it's been interesting to other people. And let's hope for a hopeful story and not a hard truth for the England match in half an hour. But whatever it is, we will come
the
through.
The character will come through.
Exactly. And we can always hope for more another year. But thank you so much, both of you. It's
Always
been a
lovely
delight.
talking to you. Thank you,
Great
Sarah.
conversation. Thanks.